DiversiTV. I'm Mark Harris, producer and host for the show. If you're just tuning in for the first time, DiversiTV is a weekly show that may eventually become a class. We haven't decided what we're going to do with it, but we've been recording content for, this is our second season now, and basically our mission, if we go to slide, guys, is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. So even if you, if you're flipping through cable channels and tune in to us randomly, we hope you'll stay, and there'll be time during the broadcast, not so much during the broadcast, but after the broadcast, to email in feedback, and at some point we'll actually go live interactive. We do have that capability with our other classes and the other classes that I do for the college. But for now, just to run down the season 2, we started out, as we always do, with a native perspective, mostly because we're on Turtle Island, and that's simply culturally appropriate to start with a native perspective. Then we do Anglo, and then Africans in America, because the first time that we did this actually was African American actually came in Black History Month, so it seemed appropriate, but it seemed to be okay to repeat that order. Latino perspective on the 24th. Halloween night was Asian perspective. Last week was the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, two-spirit perspective. This week we did a switcheroo, basically because of availability of our guests, who we hope will be able to come in next week, and if not, then there's plenty of folks in the disability community. But this week we're doing youth and youth perspective. Next week we'll be doing disability and class, the end of the month, and then rounding out season 2, spirituality and religion. So basically we generally follow the LCC terms, and we start basically the second week rather than the beginning, because scheduling the studio can get crazy, and this isn't with a class at the moment. But it will be, because there's enough topical material here to keep us hopping. So our guest tonight, focusing on a youth perspective, is Martin Rafferty and Marge Rafferty Hutchinson. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So I asked some stock questions. So since we know of each other from reputation, just to, not so much to kill time, but to introduce you to our studio audience, how did you come to live in Eugene, and why did you choose to live here if you're not actually a loc?
Well, I actually moved out here in 1991 with a girlfriend who liked Eugene and wanted to move back here, and I said, why not? I'll check it out, and I loved it. I loved the environmentalism. I loved the green, and so I just stayed. It was sort of on a whim that brought me out here from the East Coast, from Jersey. And
Jersey.
Yep,
Okay.
South Jersey, Ocean City.
Okay.
So, yeah, I've stayed here. This is my home. I've been here 16 years. This is where I raised my son.
Okay.
I was brought here. So, but the more interesting story is that recently I had left. I became a merchant marine, and so I got to leave and experience a lot of different places. And I remember one day looking at one of my friend's MySpace websites, and they had a picture of them standing on some of the street corner. It was fall, and there were leaves coming down. And I remember, oh, I really miss, that street. I miss those leaves. And I think out of all the cities that I've been to, as a merchant marine, I never found anything that felt like the energy of Eugene.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because, I grew up here for most of my life, since I was 9.
Okay.
So I lived in Springfield for a little bit too, if that counts. It's kind of one city.
It does,
Yeah.
It's all Sanchivan territory from the
Right.
native perspective. So hey, okay.
Right. So I really love the community in Eugene, and I really think it's special. I don't think there are a lot of places like Eugene.
Yeah, I think you definitely got that right. It is definitely its own unique kettle of fish. Not necessarily being from here, but having raised children in this area. It's like, okay, the school district's small enough so that I can be on a first name basis with superintendent or whoever, and influence the kid, influence the school. And both the kids felt, even though they felt school limiting, I doubt that they would have negotiated LA Unified with the same. I mean, they would have done it with the same skill that I did, but it's small enough so that you can influence it. And the interesting thing, like a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of this, but a lot of very interesting experimental trends before they go national are tried out in Oregon. And so it is a center for innovation on both sides of the spectrum, whether it's discrimination or responses to discrimination and oppression. We'll definitely be getting into that. So your experience of the community in Eugene, geographically, environmentally, culturally, you've made reference to somewhat. Since our topic is youth empowerment, I mean, who are you to care about youth issues?
Yeah, well, I am myself. Do you want to speak first?
Go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
I am a third-generation educator. So my grandfather taught vocational classes. My parents taught public school for 30 years in the poorest district of South Jersey, of New Jersey, and brothers, uncles, all teachers. And I taught for a little while, but what I really saw that I really wanted to do was work around issues of oppression and world change more than I wanted to teach math. Not that math isn't useful, but I really wanted to talk about, with young people, get in conversation about world change. And I was working as a counselor when the Thurston school shooting happened.
There?
No, I was working for options counseling.
Okay.
And they called for volunteers.
Okay.
And so 75 people went out to the school. And the teen that I was working with that day had threatened school violence at his school that day, had threatened to kill someone with a gun that he didn't have that day. And so I took him to the school to see the spontaneous reaction at Thurston High School. And the experience
To the violence.
of the spontaneous grieving and just the devastation to the whole community that was beginning to be experienced right there as a memorial at the fence. And it was powerful for him to see it and for me to witness him seeing it. And that was partly when I decided I really wanted to get involved in prevention, because I worked debriefing counselors. That was what I got assigned to do, was debrief the counselors who were counseling everyone, and heard some terrible, terrible stories that should never happen in a school.
Me too.
And you were there, you were involved in that?
No, but I mean, hold your thought, but just to talk about the ripple effect. So I work gangs in LA as a drug counselor. So 3 different, Hispanic gangs, mixed race gangs, West Side Crips, 3 different Latino gangs. Some of my clients actually moved up here after my project ended, to get out of the gang scene. So, dealing with gang-related youth, people that actually have not so much gun skill, but have killed people, or dealing with PTSD experiences with that. And so we're up here to escape all that, And then dealing with wannabe, the quote-unquote wannabe kids. It's like, wait a minute, I've actually killed people. Who are you? And dealing with the school principal, like, no, I'm not really intimidated by you. You don't have a gun. The cop in school, I have respect for him not because he has a gun, because he knows what's up, right? And so, I mean, the Kinkles worked for us, right? And so my thing representing Lane on, the gang task force when it existed is, okay, if Kip hadn't killed his parents, K through 12 would have flushed him immediately, and where would he have gone? Last chance college, okay? So here we are, and I'm dealing with, talking with the head of security, like, okay, we're in a board meeting, or meeting in the boardroom, and I just casually mentioned, because I know this is going on, okay, your officers wear bulletproof vests. But Oregon law allows them to carry guns, and in the wake of Thurston, because I'm talking with Jerry Moskos, the president, right, after that, and wow, terrible thing. I go, you know how many people come here armed on any given day? You know, so I asked that question to the head of security. He said, about 50. How do you know this? Well, we've confiscated guns.
Right.
Okay, so we know. So that's why our officers, they're not allowed to carry guns, but they all have bulletproof vests. So we ain't doing no, you know, metal detectors at every entrance to Lane Community College. And so for me, you know, it's like, I pretend that this is LA. And so I'm aware of the sight lines. You know, I don't sit with my back to any door. People think I'm paranoid. No, I work with gangs. So it's like, I deal with skinheads as part of my job. I've had threats, you know, by 16-year-olds, you know, who self-styled supremacists. So you know, we're going to take care of people like Harris because of what he's teaching. It's like, whatever.
Right.
Okay. So I've talked with relatives of victims who claim they got no counseling at all. I mean, they've said that, or they didn't. So, yeah, it would seem like, wait a minute, your relative got killed, you would focus on those kids. So several people say they didn't do that, right? You know.
Right. My understanding is that it was voluntary. So
Yeah.
no one was forced. It was like
Yeah.
there were counselors
Yeah.
available.
Yeah.
And there probably weren't enough.
Yeah.
I mean, because the whole school was impacted.
Yeah.
All the teachers, I mean, the paramedics, everyone,
Right.
you know,
Right.
everyone experienced it.
Yeah, and so, you know, I'm not taking away from the
Yeah.
response system, but I'm saying that with some people you do outreach.
Yeah.
It's culturally appropriate to do outreach. I mean, when I'm working in gangs, they're not coming to my office.
Right.
Because, you know, you don't schedule a Crip and a Blood side by side in your office. Okay, you're having a war, right? So you go out to where they are, and you go meet them where they are. And so that's actually how I came to meet some folks, and had interesting experiences with that, where I'm not certain, or at least what they've said, the response, they wouldn't have gotten that from a regular orientated counselor that didn't know about youth. Right? Because it is a PTSD experience. That's a cute little label, but that doesn't teach you how to deal with, wow, terrible stuff happened to you. How do you deal with it? How do you normalize being abused? How do you normalize seeing, you know, I mean, I could go on, and I don't want to monopolize the time, but right. I mean, that's one of the major things where we need to focus on. People are coming from a war zone, not from an Ozzie and Harriet family. How do we have them do a sane and normal transition from an insane situation? So my hat's off to you, so to speak, right? Because I know, you know, in terms of where, you know, how you look at youth issues. So continue.
Well, so did that work for a week, and actually was so depressed, honestly, and horrified by what was happening here and what was happening nationally, that I just took off for a month and went to London to think about it, because I have a friend there, to get in a different culture.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in a different kind of war, but there aren't people shooting each other there. They're blowing things up.
They're blowing things up.
But I got to think about it for a month and decided I wanted to take everything that I knew and everything that my parents and grandparents had taught me, and said, how can I impact this problem? I want there to never be another school shooting ever, anywhere. And so thinking about what I thought was missing, and that's how I created, you know, with a lot of other people, but created LEAD to say, what's missing? What are the gaps? You know, what are the young people, like you're talking about, people in gangs, or even young people not in gangs that don't have parents that are involved, that don't have support, that are just falling through, you know, in free fall.
Right.
To try to create something to catch the young people. And so we have a really high adult to youth ratio. We do outdoor adventure, so we have adrenaline-based activities for the people that need to do risky things but have it be safe. So we do, you know, outdoor adventure to meet that piece. We do public speaking to meet the leadership piece of people that want to, you know, do world change. And some people just want to come in out of the rain and be safe. And so, you know, like just somewhere to sit and just be still. And so we have that. So there's a lot of different pieces in it that over the years the teens have helped build. So we're now in our 10th year. But how I came.
10 years?
10 years.
Wow.
It's actually 1998 was the shooting. Okay. And I grew up around a lot of racial injustice in South Jersey, and grew up with that being taught as part of my heritage to interrupt it, as part of my responsibility. And, you know, with a lot of understanding about the ideals of the civil rights movement as a young person in a very racist place where, like, crosses were burned on the lawn across from us, and dogs were hung, and, you know, like, not just of black people, but of poor white people standing up to it, you know, like getting to see that up close and being taught this is your job.
Well, white people are the target by white people.
Right. Oh, no, it wasn't black people.
Yeah, right.
You know, it was, but it was like anybody who was standing up against, I mean, there were people with hoods riding around our town, you know, not on horses, but in pickup trucks, and, you know, terrorizing people and burning down houses, and getting taught that message that that was part of my responsibility to help change it. And
so it's interesting that you come from that frying pan into this fire where that was part of the history here.
Yeah, the history here.
Yeah.
So that's enough for me. Your turn.
So the question is, who am I?
Who are you to care about youth issues besides being a stereotypical youth?
Well, my mom started this nonprofit called LEAD. No. No.
Nice try.
Could we rewind?
I know who you work with. So
all right.
Nice try.
I was probably the teacher's worst nightmare. Actually, knowing a lot of teachers now and working with them, I was a teacher's worst nightmare.
Why? As a teacher?
Why as a teacher? I was someone who was smarter than the system would allow them to be. As a teacher, you can be as smart as you want, but the system will only let you be smart so far until you have to start falling into the bureaucracy of it.
Interesting.
So
observation.
I was able to be smarter than that. So I'm not saying that all of my teachers were less intelligent than me.
No, you most assiduously did not say that. I mean, that was artfully done.
Thank you.
I mean, in terms of the accuracy. So, not to be ageist about it, out of the mouth of youth.
Out of the mouth of youth. Well, I think that's where I started to really learn that in our society, we are all supposed to be funneled a certain way.
Yes.
And there's lots of room to go in different ways, but there is a certain way.
There is a funnel, too.
Yeah, there's a funnel, too. So if you want to be a doctor, here are the things you have to do. If you want to be a meth head, here are the things that, you know, there's labels and ways to get to wherever you want to go.
Yes.
And I decided from a young age that I could stop being rebellious against teachers who were just in this system, and try and think about how I could use what intelligence I had, how I could use what my mom had taught me about youth empowerment, and start working in the system, start working with the resources, you know, because youth empowerment, it has been a trendy word for a while now. It seems kind of new because now it's a trendy word with the government. But youth empowerment has
didn't used to be, and I've been around long enough till when it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. From where I can remember, it's been around in the school system for a while, and now it seems like it's getting more and more spotlight. So I started working as a youth for youth services, like at LEAD. You know, my mom ran that nonprofit, and, you know, when she would come home at like 12 o'clock at night, tired from a board meeting or whatever, I was trying to make her tea. And what I realized is that maybe I could go a step further than making her tea. Maybe I could go and help out. And so I started volunteering my time a lot. And at some point, one of the board members that I helped recruit to get on there, she was like, well, you need to start getting paid. And I was like, oh, okay. I'll get paid for what I'm...
Recruiting.
Yeah.
Hey, right.
So, I mean, it's kind of passed down, from that. But really, I think that through the vast experiences that people have shared with me, my friends, my family, and just being able to observe society, I was really able to it was like I was given everything I needed to do this professionally. Like I haven't been to college yet to do this in that way. Like I probably couldn't go and get a job at the school system and be an admin. But as far as working with youth, recruiting people, getting them engaged, getting grant requirements met, I've been given every kind of tool. And so, but the specific ways that I went, David Oakes was going to be on here tonight, and I work for David Oakes on one of my jobs.
Hey, I lucked out.
Yeah.
On that
so, when I was a youth, when I was younger, the school system really tried to press the whole,
ADD thing on
yeah,
you.
the ADD. You should take these pills.
Right.
And when I chose to do that, I started to realize that I wasn't being myself. But it was too late for that at that point. They wanted me to keep on, and I had lots of support from my family and from the community to stop. But what started to happen was the psychiatrical system started to take over, regardless of what I wanted or my family wanted. It was trying to get me to, to go down that you're crazy, So that's why I'm especially interested in working in the mental health care system, or against the mental health care system, or in unison, really, to give alternatives of treatment to people. So there's tons of, what I come back to is there's tons of ways to utilize youth in every area. And as a society, I feel like we aren't utilizing all youth in all different areas. So my goal in life is to learn how to actually integrate youth from the beginning. Like when youth start to get interested about something, how can we put them in that place where they can make the most difference? Because youth are powerful, they're intelligent, they don't think inside the limited status that we're forced to. We go to college to learn what the rules are, what the boundaries are, and those boundaries and rules most of the time don't work. Like they didn't work to be my teacher. It didn't work. Those rules didn't work. So I want to learn and teach how youth can be not empowered, but how adults can step out of the way and let youth take the power that's theirs.
Okay. Now, well, you're talking about parts of my life here. Right? So, today we had the Peacemakers Conference, and so
presenting as well.
I did a thing called Justice Chess, and so that was basically the idea of, okay, game chess is a simulation of war. That's what it is. But it's there is correlations to a larger life. Justice chess is a simulation for transformational peace, social change. How do you do it? Okay, what's the game? Who are your opponents? What is the power you have as a pawn? And it's partly the power of definition. So I mean, what you're saying. And to use the familiar phrase, you think out of the box. Well, for them, it's not a box, it's actually a hypercube, but they don't have the language to explain that it's a hypercube.
Right.
They're just saying, like I used a quote from my daughter and putting it in the context, all right? And the line was, like out of the mouth of youth. It's a thin line between radical and common sense. Mm-hmm. Right? And so that came into context. And I said, I have to tell you the whole story of what prompted that comment. And I said, so the use of the term radical in American politics was the radical Republicans. And here's why they were radical. All right? Lincoln was a moderate. So Lincoln's solution to slavery was send all the black people to Costa Rica to keep from getting into the Civil War. Yo, wait a minute. You got black people fighting the Revolutionary War, making America before there's an America, fighting in the Civil War, And your solution to avoid this is send all the black people to Costa Rica? And you're a moderate, and you're the guy that they say freed the slaves? Okay, so he's a moderate. The radical Republicans, Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, okay, white guys, said, here's the solution to slavery. Okay? Free the slaves. Make them citizens. Give them the vote. Give them free education. We can't pay them back for slavery, but here's what reparations would look like. Let's give them 40 acres and a mule so that they can work and, produce a livelihood. And, by the way, make them citizens with full rights equal to whites. That's radical. Black people are equal to whites. In saying that in 1865. And that's what, Giannis, it's a thin line between radical and common sense. Right, that's common sense.
Right.
So talking about the history of chess, the hidden history of chess, and kids said, well, you're making it racial. No, it was racialized from the Inquisition. That's the form of chess that okay? Black against white, It came from the Moors using checkers, black and red. So, boom, when you have the earliest chess pieces being Moors against Christians, and the Moors are black and the Christians are white, I'm not putting race in it. That's in the question. That's in it already, So there's a whole hidden history in terms of how you, do things. And so, I said I did, as a middle schooler, petitioning for the 18-year-old vote. Now, I wasn't going to be able to vote for another decade, even at that point. But the logic was, we're in Vietnam, and you can fight and die for your country, and you can't vote? That's whack.
Yeah.
Okay? But we were able to get the 18-year-old vote in 3 years. Now, when you guys want a more expanded curriculum, okay, I got to tell you, having worked on the curriculum, and your school district ain't paying for it and ain't promoting it, it's like you need to do the education yourself and not wait. I mean, you work for systemic change, but you've got to be the change that you want to be yourself, not wait for the system. And because that becomes another piece in terms of, the radical idea. I mean, and the high school, in my high school, it's like sex education isn't working. Let's do free contraceptives through the health office, which is a radical idea in 72. But they started doing it in 92 in LA Unified for AIDS. So, but if they'd started doing it when we had suggested it as youth in 72, they would have been that much more ahead of the game. Right? So it's not that youth have crazy ideas or they are labeled crazy, but but remember, we're talking about a mental health system that defined escaping slaves as insane. They're crazy for wanting to escape slavery.
Yeah, or women, or anyone
women,
that doesn't follow the status quo is crazy.
Right.
I mean, that is what the mental health care system is best at, is being a tool to use to disempower people who are already oppressed, and in a way that says, you're okay, but you're crazy. That's why you're doing this behavior. It's not because something wrong is happening. The only thing that's wrong is happening within you.
Yeah.
And then that makes it okay to oppress them because they're crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, when saying that, thinking outside of the box. When I use that term, I should think of a more unique term. I think that whenever I hear that term, it's always better. It's always like thinking about how to do something better. Thinking about how to do something that's not a system. These systems are one size fits all. They lose so much. You lose so many youth. You lose so many mental health care patients. You lose when you try and systemize it. And when you look at people individually, that's when you start thinking outside of the box. That's when you can actually help them or offer whatever support that you can give them.
Right.
The radical common sense thing makes me think of something that one of the teens said, was that we were talking about who gets to make decisions in school. Like, we were looking at school and empowerment issues. It was actually last year's Peacemakers Conference that a teen and I were going to lead the topic of power in school. And so we were thinking about it, talking about it, and we were drawing up a chart together of who gets to make real decision making in schools. And we got to the conference and presented it, and the teens in the conference were thinking about it with us and looking at, well, they have student council and they get to decide about school dances, and you can chew gum in class maybe. And then there's like an advisory group that maybe gets to talk to the principal, and they get to maybe listen to some things. And then there's the school board and the state board of education, But as you get higher up to the real decision-making piece, they have teens. They might have a teen in on the board in an advisory capacity.
A teen.
Right.
Well, it's
Maybe two.
It's two teens who.
But they're not in voting capacity.
They're not in voting capacity,
and not,
right.
And not
Right.
on the state
Right.
level. And so
Right.
the teen said, well, I'm going to be on the school board. And an adult that heard this, not in lead, outside lead, said, well, you can't, because you have to be elected. And only voting people get, only voting age people get to elect who's on the school board.
Right.
And that's an interesting loop.
Right.
That's an interesting
Right.
circle. And so the
Right.
teen said, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to change that law.
Okay.
And
Okay.
So that's the radical common
Right.
sense.
Right.
Is that
Right.
radical or is that common sense? 'Cause you
Okay.
said,
So where do
why
we
shouldn't teens-
lower the? Yeah. What? Okay.
Why shouldn't a teen-
You can drive a car. Why can't you vote?
why can't you make decisions about your own school? Like because you're not capable.
Mom, and Kitty Piercy was at our youth action board meeting. I work for the county as well, and we run a youth
He's
board.
a busy guy.
Busy guy. Youth action board every 5:30 on Thursday nights at the library. It's a little plug. The mayor came in, and our youth wanted to know how to have a youth on the city council, and the answer was easy enough. She said it fairly easily. She said, I don't know if this is the exact number. I think it was like 150,000 people need to sign something to put it into a vote, and we can vote on it statewide. Like it would have to happen statewide in order for us to put a youth in the city council here in Eugene. But that it's doable if enough people signed it and passed it. Then that's how
150,000?
I mean, does
No,
that
that's
sound
not a
right?
ridiculous number in a
Right.
state of 3.5 million. But
Right.
okay.
What's the petition? It's probably what it takes to get a law on the ballot. The petition.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
The
yeah.
petition.
Yeah.
Signature petition thing.
And we started talking about what that would take, and what kind of change that would do. What kind of change would one voice be on a city council of a youth, and looking at do we have more power on the city council, or would we have more power in a mob that comes to city council every council meeting and all stand there and speak our voice, maybe outside of the box.
I could make a case either way.
Yeah, right. Well, one way takes 150,000 people, and one way takes a little organizing. But it's about the thing, like waiting for the system. Like, we weren't allowed to choose if we chewed gum or not, but we certainly found interesting ways about how to chew gum and taking the consequences of the actions. But I think a question that comes up for me about youth empowerment in systems is, do we need empowerment in that system, or do we abandon that system? So what are youth doing instead of waiting around in public schools? Network charter school and different church alternative schools are coming up, and people are like, I want to go there. That's where I'm going to get decision-making power. So it's not necessarily that these youth aren't getting powers, that they're leaving the system altogether. And sometimes I wonder if that's not the best case scenario.
Well, if you were asking that as a question, since we're now into the next question about how do you approach making youth more powerful in terms of youth empowerment,
Right.
Leaving the system, joining the system, creating,
Getting together. And
getting
working
together. There's no reason why you can't do many things simultaneously. But when I ask the youth, okay, so given this history, if you think about what Justice Chess moves are, so getting the vote, ending slavery, okay, you know, when you talk about youth empowerment, it's like, okay, what power do youth have beyond being consumers, beyond being, you know, I think if you want to try out this term, thinking outside the box, it's not thinking outside the box. It's navigating the hypercube.
The hypercube?
Yeah, because it's basically invisible, but it's an actual real construct. It's a tesseract. Twist time, you know, all that kind of stuff. So negotiating the tesseract, or whatever, however you want to look at it.
Right.
So the youth want to say, well, we want to have cultural competency taught in the schools. We want an expanded history, because like what you were talking about with, you know, how come we don't know who the native nation that Columbus, how come we don't hear both sides of the story of everybody that's there? Okay, how come we only hear, I mean, these are white kids saying, how come we only hear about the white perspective when you never hear about, you know, the slaves that speak 5 languages, that, you know, are doctors and lawyers in Africa, and they come here and they're not allowed to read and write, and they're still thriving, and these are the people in the civil rights movement, you know, in the 1700s, 1600s, you know, all that. How come we never hear about, you know, the Irish people that are fighting alongside, you know, being discriminated against, you know, by the English in England, and also by people here. Benjamin Franklin not liking the Germans, you know, don't hire an Irishman, you know, in New York or New Jersey. I mean,
yeah, Irish
word.
worked on the docks because nobody could swim.
Right.
And if anybody fell in, Irish were expendable.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Yeah, the teens were actually talking about that. Our workshop today was empowering youth at the Peacemakers Conference, and we had 2 teens presenting with a staff person, and I didn't do very much. Mostly Sky Rios and Jessica Spalding presented, but they were really looking at who has decision-making in organizations. They were talking about organizations that serve young people.
Yeah.
And LEAD, basically, we sat down and said, we want to push the whole community, we want to push the whole country, that any organization that serves young people must have young people in decision-making capacity, or it's youth oppression.
With actual power.
Correct.
Yes.
Not advisory capacity.
No.
Not, we're going to decide
actual
it,
power.
and show it to you, but real
Right.
voting power. So
Right.
on boards of directors, you know, making executive level decisions. And, you know, on the school board, things like that. And the teens started talking about what it would look like if they were in control of the systems that they have to navigate through, like the juvenile justice system or child custody, where children don't get to have
No.
even input.
Right.
Sometimes, where they're sent around like pawns.
Right.
And they were talking about, you know, the impact that would have on their lives if they could get to make decisions for themselves. And most of them, when we asked, they didn't know they were allowed to go to a school board meeting. They didn't know that young people were allowed to go to city council meetings. And when I talking about history, because I said, you can influence your curriculum. You could decide what you get to get taught about. I said,
Right.
do you get to learn about your history as young people? Do you know about the Children's March? You know,
Right.
do you know about the influence that had 5,000 young people getting jailed in 1 week? What that did in the civil rights movement? Do you know about that? And none of them had any clue about it.
Right.
And I was like, that's your history. You all have differences, but you're all young people. So
And that wasn't that long ago.
But they didn't know anything about it, and they said that would be a lot more interesting than learning about dead presidents, you know, and battles that were fought in the 1600s, or, you know, land lines, but to learn about the history of change. And so I said, they also said that they have rules at their school that we actually did a little research on about hugging. Did you know that young people aren't allowed? I didn't know this, that some schools have, and I'm a Native American, some schools have what's called a TP hug rule, where you can only hug, they said.
Or an A hug.
They didn't call it that. They said
a
you can
TP hug.
TP hug,
Yeah.
or 3-second rule.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Springfield Middle,
Yes.
it's no hugging.
no hugging
Yes.
allowed.
No touchy-touchy.
touching.
Right.
No touchy-touchy is what the
Right.
vice principal said.
Unless there is some kind of measurable tragedy that happened in the family, then it's okay to hug, but only if there's been something that horrible has happened.
Well, you know, and you know what's driving that. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's the whole boundary, sexual harassment, et cetera, thing, right? Which, you know, when we were talking about, okay, girls are getting pregnant in 1971, and the rule was if you show, you go. So we didn't have teen parent programs, or girls couldn't come to school pregnant, et cetera, back in the 70s, right?
I remember that in the 80s.
Right. Well, yeah. So that changed in LA Unified, at some point, and then it's kind of spread around the country. But so part of that is not sex education is still the plumbing lecture, but it's not about skill. It's not about what do you do with the emotions of your first kiss, hugging, whatever. So banning something, prohibition is not skill building. Okay, we know that from prevention.
Right.
Okay, skill building. How do you negotiate all these different things? Safe touch. We talk about that, but we don't necessarily empower folks. So yeah, unless you have a death in the family or whatever.
Some schools had no hugging
Yeah,
for any
and
reason.
no hugging at all. So again, that's not skill building.
Right.
And what is our place as educators if you give us the voice? What are you afraid might happen?
Well,
Okay.
and what does it do to learn in an environment where you don't get to be human? Like,
Yes.
where you don't get to do that,
Right.
where you don't get to be completely human. And it's like, they said, they can't, if someone's crying, they can't even comfort them, is what one of the kids in the workshop said, that they got a referral for comforting someone crying, like physically comforting someone. And I had no idea, and so I said, as a community member, I didn't know that. That's really important to me.
Yeah.
I'm appalled.
Right.
Like, I don't think that's okay.
So what would be the response
So
if a Thurston happens again?
And I said, how do you think the community can find out about this if you don't tell us?
Right.
Like,
If
this
it's
is
not being reported in
your
the school
leadership.
paper
Right.
or the Register Guard.
Right, and
or
so one of
whatever.
our
Yeah.
teens had a letter in the Register Guard today, and so I read it,
Okay.
and it was about stigmatized homeless youth,
Okay.
and I said, what would it be like if there were 100 letters about this issue of hugging? And I don't think this is the be-all, end-all issue for
No,
youth,
right.
but it's a piece of saying, youth get to be fully human in the place where they have to spend the majority of their day.
Right.
And
Forced to spend the majority of their day.
3 of them said that they would write a letter about it, so I'll be looking in the Register Guard for letters from teens about hugging.
So, I mean, if we look about, so Isho Yeshua said, what you've done for the least of these, you've done to me. So we're 45 minutes into it, and this is the first time, it's been a rich discussion. So the first time that we've talked about the least empowered youth population, would demonstrably be homeless youth, right? And the stigma, and, oh, they're drug addicted, oh, they're runaway, oh, they're mentally ill, yada, 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 layers upon layers of stigmatizing oppression. What's your piece on that?
I have a big
Pieces.
piece. I have a big piece on
All
it. Sky, that was Sky's letter? Yeah, Sky and a few other youth and I are working on a documentary about homeless youth in Eugene.
Great.
And so we're interviewing homeless youth in Eugene. We're saying it's so easy to look outside and ignore it. You can see 5 homeless people, and if you don't look at their faces, you'll never know that one of those people is a 13-year-old girl, People know that there's homeless youth in the world,
Right.
but in their imagination, they like to imagine that that's not how we roll in Eugene. In
Right.
Eugene, that's not how it happens. And so we're making a video with Looking Glass with CEY and it's youth ran. It's me and 4 other youth, 2 of them currently homeless. One of them who was in the foster
Care system.
care system. Sorry, foster care doesn't really line up for me. But and one youth who's been below poverty line all of his life.
Yeah.
And looking at how we can destigmatize it, because people are afraid for their own safety. They have stories about what homeless people are, but when you look at homeless youth, it's like we try so hard to normalize everything about, when you wake up in the morning, if you stub your toe or if you're feeling upset, you drink some coffee, take some Tylenol, go to work. We try so hard to keep everything so normalized that when something, like when a youth is sitting there homeless, who's been out all night drenched in the rain. And I have footage of, you know, youth sleeping outside on concrete.
Yeah.
Not couch surfing,
No,
you know,
right.
not hanging out with friends
Right.
on concrete in
Right.
the rain.
Right.
And when you see it, if you actually look at it, it will haunt you. But we're trained not to look at it. In school, we're trained not to hug. We're
Right.
trained to make it normal, and that's what society does. It normalizes everything, and so this
Normalizes oppression. Really.
normalizes oppression.
Definitely.
And so this video is really going to force whoever's watching it to actually see that in the face. And I had a comment about empowering youth, because I wanted to come back to that. Back when I went to high school, I went to an alternative high school for a time, and when we asked for power or whatnot, the principal was like, "Oh, sure," and picked 2 random youth, brought them up, and started asking them questions. All right, what should we do about this? What should we do about this? 3 questions later, they gave 3 answers, and the answers were horrible. You know, the answer, and this is an it happened, but it's an exaggeration of what really happens.
Yeah.
Before you can empower a youth,
Yeah.
before you put someone in a position of power, just like any normal citizen, you put any normal citizen in a position of power, if they don't have the education behind what the power is,
Right.
if they don't get the system,
Right.
then they're not going to make good decisions.
Right.
And what's happening with these 2 youth on the 4J school board who don't really have a voice, but they sit there for the whole meeting, and all the words, big words, stuff that they have no idea about because they go to school, they're not paid to, you know, they're coming here and sitting here, and they're like, all right, well, what's your opinion, you know, an hour later on this subject, you know? And they tried their best to give feedback, I imagine, but you can't, that's not empowerment.
No.
When you throw
Tokens.
tokens at people who don't have the decision-making education behind that.
Right.
So I think that the most dangerous part about empowering any token is by looking at bad examples, like they didn't do a very good job, or, you know, this teen center in the past, when Lead was opening their teen center, people were talking about what went wrong in the past, you know, how they messed up. This teen center in the past did this wrong, and you guys are looking like you're going to do that wrong. But it's more about pointing out how we can do it now. So youth empowerment actually works when you put attention behind it, when you put the same resources that you would put behind anyone who's going to be empowered.
I think the issue that you if we're going to restate it a different way to illuminate it, because one of the things we talked about in the workshop is, look, I'm a product of the public school system, but my family's history indicates that you cannot trust the school system to educate you for empowerment. You have to do it yourself. Okay? You want to change the curriculum, you have to educate yourself about what you learn about, and then bring it to them, and then make it easier for them to adopt it. So that, you know, to empower youth to be able to have the conversation about what's your opinion when you use a 13-cent word, is like they already have to know what the 13-cent word is, and they aren't getting it in your school.
Right.
They aren't. So, you know, it's like Dad talking about, you know, he's taking an entrance exam for medical school and there's yachting jargon, and he studied on anatomy. What does having a yacht have to do with being a doctor? Well, I mean, there's an obvious class inference there, but if you've never been on a yacht, why, and you're expecting to study for medical school and studying anatomy and physiology, that's a wild card. So that's just like them, oh, well, the token youth. Well, it's basically freezing the power relationships. So part of the empowerment piece with youth has to be them educating themselves independent of whatever, of the game that they're about to participate in.
And the other piece, too, is allies being educated.
Allies being educated.
So that's a huge piece if you're going to, I mean, because, like, say for our board of directors, part of our impaired, we said we have to have teens on the board. We're not going to have a board, you know, with our philosophy without it. and we're not going to have one teen, so we're going to have 3 or 4 on a board, of 10 or 12 people. But the other people on the board that aren't teens have to get educated about youth depression, and they have to be willing to be educated.
Yeah.
And that's a commitment, and they have to be willing to continue to learn and notice, okay, so I'm functioning in the role of an ally. I'm not just here in my capacity as a board member. I'm here as an ally as well. And for people with privilege that never think about privilege, saying, what does that mean to give it up, to step backwards and give up a position of power or give up a lot of voice? It's a difficult thing. It's inside work to get people to do that.
And it's not
allies.
so much giving up, it's sharing, because you're actually not losing power. Okay? What you're giving up is exclusivity.
Right.
Privilege of being the only one allowed to speak.
Yeah.
Right.
And, because the discussion becomes richer when you incorporate people thinking in the space around the box and saying, okay, here's how it connects to inside the box, and you weren't even looking at this.
Right. Although I think that people who have that kind of power would disagree and say, oh, it was rich enough when we had all the decision-making power. But logic says that the more the merrier, the more input you have, the smarter the decision is going to be. But even to go back about the comment that you made, youth educating themselves is sadly, it's not a possibility, but sadly, it's not set up to have youth be interested in educating themselves.
Right.
Our system sets them up to be interested in video games.
Right.
And getting by and normalizing things.
Right.
So I think that what we need is allies, people who are going to ally with youth and say, hey, this is how it could be.
And to encourage the young people to wake up.
Yeah.
It is important for awake people to stay awake, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So giving them a space where it's cool to be thinking about things like that, and show them what's exciting about it. Show them an alternative perspective, because the culture tells them to tune out.
Well, I think, the culture, the way I look at it is, addiction is slavery, and video games is a form of addiction to distract you with violence, sexuality, whatever, so you're not looking at the real deal.
Yeah.
So it's a radical thing that you're doing, filming, a documentary about homeless youth, out there. All right, so the next piece is then, what do we do with that, or what do they do with that?
Right, and purposely, it's we want to stay away from giving any solutions in the video, because for these youth, we could make the viewers of the video happy at the end and show some warm and
a happy ending.
Yeah, a happy ending. We don't. Those youth are still outside right now. Right now, they're outside waiting for people in a church to go home so they can hopefully sleep under.
Right.
That's where they are right now, just waiting.
And I even know the church you're talking about.
Right.
So right. Yeah.
So there is no happy ending until it's all happy. That didn't make any sense.
No, not at all.
Totally
National security begins when everybody has a house, everybody's fed, everybody's
Everyone's
clothed,
supported.
everybody has,
What a
health care
radical-
like Congress has. Everybody, every human being.
Right.
That's when we start with national security.
That's a radical idea.
Well, there's a thin line between radical
Common
and
sense and radical.
I think we all need to be insane. That would help us.
Well, it's not so much about, it's...
Insane against the norm.
Well, I'm a congenital drapetomaniac, okay? So that's the actual mental illness that slaves are crazy for escaping slavery. So, if you do a reframe on that, okay, I'm obsessed with freedom. Fixated on it, like obsessive, compulsive about freedom.
Sounds
and
patriotic to me.
liberation. Well, yeah.
There's some white guys who were doing that
I
read
hear.
about in history books.
Yeah, right.
Oh,
right.
right.
Well, one of the teens was quoting a history person today saying, no taxation without representation,
Right.
but I'm a 16-year-old who pays taxes every time I work, and 50% of them are going for the war, and I would rather have had them go for health care reform.
That's right.
And he's like, I don't get any
That's
say
right.
in that.
That's right.
So taxation without representation is still happening.
So, final thoughts. An hour goes by fast.
There's a lot of resources out there for anyone watching. LEAD, Mind Freedom, the county, just tons of different resources out there that people are coming together and trying to create change. It's just about hooking up. So I would love if someone who is just not really connected would come and walk into LEAD or walk into Mind Freedom or come to our youth group on Thursday nights and say, I want change, you know? There's a cool little picture of a homeless guy holding a sign that says, keep your money, I want change. And,
That's good. That's good.
We have
Got another minute. So.
Leeds version of Thanksgiving is on Tuesday, and we call it the gratitude celebration because we keep the gratitude and leave the rest.
Okay.
And everyone is invited to come and join us if they would like. It is at Roosevelt Middle School at 6 o'clock. And we also have another event the community is invited to. You can see on our website at leadteam.com, we have an event called the Plantathon, where this year we'll be planting with REI and McKinsey River Trust on February 2nd, 12,000 trees. And it was my son's idea. He started it.
All right.
So,
well, Madge Rafferty Hutchinson and Martin Rafferty, thaned you for coming.
thank you, Mark.
If you like what you've seen, email us at liveclass at lanecc.edu. This has been DiversiTV. I'm Mark Harris. See you next week with a brand new show.